Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of Rob Prospect Podcast. My name is Emmy Nixon. Today we're going to get into our free agency day one reactions. With a lot of big moves played out today in free agency this afternoon. We're going to get into all of the major moves, the running backs, the quarterbacks, the big defensive signings. But before we get into it, leave a like on this video. Uh, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. We're going to continue to cover the NFL offseason at length. MLB season is coming around as well. We're going to be covering that as well, and NBA playoffs, all of it. If that interests you, subscribe to the channel and join the fam. But before we get into today, joining me from Houston, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. How you doing?
Good. There's really nothing to complain about right now if you're a sports fan. March Madness is basically here. Like, we are in conference championship week officially. Sunday will be selection Sunday. We'll have a bracket to fill out. Some of you like to fill out 5-10 brackets. I usually only do 1, 2, or 3. But regardless of who you are, everyone fills out brackets, whether you care about the actual basketball that's played or you're just there for the chaos that ensues. We've got NFL free agent moves to talk about here for at least the next couple of weeks. Like, we've had this initial frenzy. I'm assuming a second wave will come probably tomorrow at the very soonest. Who knows? A move could break during the show, so we'll keep an eye on that in case it does. And then moves kind of for the stragglers will kind of trickle in over the next couple weeks, and we'll keep an eye on that. We've got the NBA playoffs here in about a month. The playing games will start. We'll cover that at length as we always do. We've got the MLB season here in about 2.5 weeks officially. We're going to be previewing that in a series of 3 episodes that we'll get to at the earliest probably tomorrow. And then don't forget about Dit Hole. We're going to be doing 1 or 2 episodes of that every week, especially now that March Madness is here. So with all that being said, and spring football is, of course, a week from tomorrow. So that's pretty big as well. But with all that being said, that's enough with the that's enough with all that. Let's get into where we're going tonight, which is NFL free agency frenzy day one. Now, to be clear, it's the legal tampering period. So these deals cannot officially be signed until I think it's
Wednesday,
3 or 4
start
o'clock.
of the new league year.
Yeah, the league new year. But teams could officially agree to the deals as soon as I think it was 11 a.m. Central Time today is when you started to see all the moves come in. So do we just start as simply as with the quarterbacks?
Yeah, let's do that. Your team made a big move, signing Russell Wilson to a $1.2 million deal. We've had some conversation about it over text where I could kind of get a vibe on how you're feeling, but go ahead and give your thoughts, man. I'm interested to hear what you think about it, and then I'll respond with mine.
Well, there's a lot here, obviously. Look, first of all, it's a great value. It's great value. Whether you think Russ is past his prime, whether you think he's washed, whether you think he still has something in the tank, that's all your opinion, and you're entitled to your opinion. But for the value that the Steelers are getting him for basically zero, $1 million, the vet minimum, for a guy that, as Chiseled Adonis said earlier today in his reaction video, my fellow Steelers fan, that I discovered and that we both, watch his content.
Yeah, former guest on the pod too.
For the Steelers timeline and what they have had in the quarterback room since Big Ben retired. Even going back to like the last 2-3 years of Ben's career, where he just was not the same. He wasn't. Um, we would rather, and I agree with Mr. Adonis, I would rather have a has been than a has not. Steelers have, when they play to their potential, a really good defense. I don't know if I would call it elite, but it's really good. It's part of the reason they've been able to sustain the success that they've been able to over the past couple of years, winning 9 and 10 games every season, because that defense keeps them in games when their offense has been really hard to watch at times with the quarterback play and the offensive line play. So you have a great defense. The running game we really saw come on this past year. It's still not a great pass blocking offensive line, but it has, this has the potential to be a really good run game. I'd say top half of the league at the very least. Need to fill the center position, but I think that's coming, whether it's in free agency or the draft. Probably could use a left tackle, but I'm not here to talk about the extenuating circumstances. My point being is there are good pieces here, and it's a team that's ready to win. So I think for the value that you get Russell Wilson at, which is $1.2 million, the Broncos paying the rest, what is it, 37, 38 million, for a veteran who's been there, done that, can kind of bring the leadership that I think, have not seen from this Steelers, like nobody in this Steelers offense since Pouncey departed, since Ben departed. There hasn't been that centralized, I guess, leadership voice from a veteran that's really been through the ringer in the NFL, that's been to the highest heights, and as recently as 2022 has been kind of, I don't know, really heavily scrutinized for his personality, kind of how he's acted, and for not living up to the expectation of the contract that he signed in Denver and what he was supposed to be for that team. And some of the rift that went on, I guess, between Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. And he's not a perfect player, but I guess my overall point would be, my overall takeaway on this is, I think it's some people, I'm not saying you, I'm not saying myself or anybody else that I know, but some people that I have seen since this deal went down late last night, I think are kind of misconstruing the point on this. The Steelers aren't signing Russell Wilson thinking that he's going to be an elite quarterback. That's not what they're signing him for. They want someone to, number one, come in and compete with Kenny Pickett, as Kenny Pickett has not lived up to any of the expectations that were set for him being a first-round draft pick. We've seen flashes at times, but nowhere near the consistency that we need to see at this point. And he really hasn't, I guess, stayed healthy. And not all of that's his fault, but I mean, it's something. And Russell Wilson, whether you like him or not as a player right now, the Steelers think, look, they're gonna frame this as a competition, but he's gonna start. I believe that in my heart to hearts. And whether you like him or not, his play over the last two years, good or bad, has been better than what the Steelers have had in their quarterback room. And if they can just get even below average to average quarterback play from Russell Wilson for this year, making the necessary moves they need to make elsewhere with this roster, given that they won 10 games last year with Mitch Trubisky, with Mason Rudolph, who did play well, and with Kenny Pickett for the first part of the year, they probably think they can win maybe they can get to the playoffs and maybe win a playoff game. So, I mean, the last time that, we saw Russell Wilson with a real solid defense, with some good surrounding weapons and a good run game, he was able to win playoff games. So I think the Steelers realize, Omar Khan realizes, Mike Tomlin realizes that we're the Pittsburgh Steelers. We have not won a playoff game now going on 7 seasons, the longest drought in franchise history. And this quarterback play isn't cutting it. And we're going to bring in a veteran on a good value to at least compete with our rookie that we drafted 2 years ago to see if it maybe lights a fire under Kenny Pickett, or if this veteran that's been there, done that, can maybe reignite his career a little bit with good surroundings in a good organization. That's my take.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on, it being really good value. I think the more that I've thought about it, the more I realize this was not only the more realistic route than going for a Justin Fields or a Kirk Cousins, but it was also, I think it was the better route because ultimately signing a guy at $1.2 million versus a guy in Justin Fields who the negotiation, no matter what you think about Justin Fields, the negotiations in terms of a contract extension are going to start at the Daniel Jones number, which is $40 million a year. So
It's true.
wanting to build up the roster and keep your flexibility in this kind of period of, you've been, 9-8 here, but it's really hard to go from good to great, especially when you're investing a ton of money into the quarterback position and not getting what you want out of it still. And there was a chance, even if you did go get Justin Fields, that didn't work out either. So this is a low risk move, extremely low risk. If it worst case scenario, he plays poorly, you put in Pickett, and then you go on from there. And you still have the draft to fill other needs. It checks a box. It really alleviates some of that pressure to kind of, you know, bring in competition for Pickett. And I think you can have. Can you have like the 13th best offense in the NFL with Russell Wilson? Yeah, I think so. And I think
Yeah.
that will be good enough for having, a top 6 to 7 defense in football.
And a couple more things I want to mention before we get on to Kirk Cousins. Number one, I've seen a lot of people scrutinizing how Russell Wilson's personality is going to fit into the Steelers organization and whether or not he's going to come in more humble than he was, I guess, when he got to Denver and the things that he was kind of demanding from that organization at the time that kind of rubbed people the wrong way. Whether or not, he's too quirky for the city of Pittsburgh. His personality is weird. People like to make fun of him for that. And I'm all here for the jokes. The Let's Ride stuff, the Mr. Unlimited stuff. I think that shit's hilarious.
Yeah.
I can get with that. But let's not act like Mike Tomlin has not seen his fair share of weird, quirky, out of this world, difficult to deal with personalities in his time in Pittsburgh. And I don't think I don't think he's going to bat an eye, if Russell Wilson's a little quirky or he's a little weird. If the bottom line is, if Russell Wilson comes in, he works his ass off, and he wins games for the Steelers, nothing else is going to matter.
Yeah.
Nothing else is going to matter. So I don't know. I don't really buy into all that personality stuff. I mean, he is who he is at this point. You get him at a good value, and the hope is if he is a B quarterback, like I think he has been, at least he was for parts of last year. That and the Steelers offense with the surrounding parts of this run game and that defense absolutely can win games. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the pairing of the running game with his deep ball could be an interesting pairing as well. I think that will be a different dimension that the Steelers haven't had in a few years now. So I think it's a good move overall. But I think that that's enough for that conversation. Let's move on to Kirk Cousins, who got I think 4 years, 180 million, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 100 million guaranteed. I
Yep.
don't have the details of the contract in front of me, but I if I remember correctly, it was somewhere in that realm for the Atlanta Falcons. And I'll start with this. If I'm being honest, I thought Kirk was going to be back in Minnesota. I wasn't ruling out him going to Atlanta, but I didn't really foresee, Atlanta giving out a 4 year deal. Like the 4 year deals come for to a guy coming off an Achilles injury, that does seem like a lot. But a key point in all of this is the fact that Arthur Blank, their owner, is in his mid to late 80s now, and he wants to see his team win. And I think there was just a level of competency that he wanted to bring in, and when the owner is demanding a certain level, and you don't know what to expect in terms of a rookie coming in the draft. Like there's always risks to that. With Kirk Cousins, you know who he is. He's a
Oh yeah.
established guy, and you know I think he answered some of the questions that we had of him in years past with these last couple of years of play. I think he was able to be extremely productive, win a lot of games, and up until the point where he got injured, you could argue he was playing his best football of his entire career. So ultimately, can you win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins? I don't know, but your chances are exponentially higher with Kirk Cousins in terms of coming in and being, you know, borderline top 10 guy right away. You have a better chance of that happening than, say, bringing in a rookie quarterback. And we don't know what the rookies are. They could come in and be world beaters, but it's just the unknown part of it that I think was unattractive to Arthur Blank at this point in his life. He just wants a level of assuredness.
I actually really like this, and this is why. First of all, the way that the contract is structured, even though it's 4 years, 180 million, to which would seem like, I mean, that takes him past his 39th birthday. He's coming off an Achilles injury. Um, the reports are initially really good that he's recovering well and expects to be
Hmm.
ready. Looks really good in workouts and stuff. But, until you're back on a field in an NFL game, you never know how that stuff tends to play itself out. My point is, when you actually look at the contract and dig a little deeper, you are right. It is $100 million guaranteed. There is a $50 million signing bonus. So once he signs the deal on probably what will be Wednesday or Thursday, he gets $50 million right off the bat. But when you look at the contract, 90 of the $100 million in guarantees are over the next 2 seasons. So 2024, I believe he gets around 45 million this upcoming year. And the bottom line is, like, you weren't getting Kirk Cousins, a B plus quarterback in this, a borderline top 10 quarterback at times. You weren't pulling him away from Minnesota for, I don't think, anything significantly less than that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so if you wanted him, you were going to have to pay the price for it. But I think when you look at the contract, to me, this is really a 2-year thing. I think the Falcons are viewing, I could be wrong, but I think the Falcons are viewing this as initially, look, we have a good young roster. We could certainly add pieces here or there. Our defense improved significantly last year. We're in a division that's certainly winnable. I mean, I know the Buccaneers look formidable for next year as they re-signed Baker, but outside of that, I mean, this division is certainly up for grabs. I think we have good young pieces on offense, and our quarterback play has just been a disaster for much of the past couple of years. And similar to Pittsburgh, we wanted a veteran rather than a rookie to come in and maybe raise the floor of this team at the very least. And Kirk Cousins certainly does that. I think Atlanta has a good offensive line that'll give them adequate protection. They probably need another receiver or two. But look, I like Drake London. He's a good young piece. I like Kyle Pitts. I think he could be utilized better in this Zach Robinson offense with some good quarterback play. And I'm sure they'll address some of those needs in the draft now that they don't have to address quarterback, and that's some of the flexibility that this gives you. But going back to my original point, I think if you get solid Kirk Cousins, like the Kirk Cousins we've seen the past 3 or 4 years in Minnesota for the next 2 years, where the bulk of the guarantees kick in, and then you make it to, I think it'll be the 2026 season when I think he's guaranteed only $10 million. But if you want to move on at that point, it's certainly not going to be as burdensome as you would initially think moving on at that point than it is just looking at 4 years, 180 million, thinking that's going to take him all the way to age 39. That's how I view it. I view this as 2 years. Maybe let's open up our window a little bit. We're in an easy division. We have good young pieces. We can still add here and there, maybe through the draft, whatever money we have left over in free agency. Maybe we can restructure some contracts. I'm not well versed on their situation, but I mean, if you get good Kirk Cousins, you certainly win that division. And I mean, how many quarterbacks in the NFC right now are, I kind of ask this rhetorically, but if Kirk Cousins plays like the Kirk Cousins we've seen the past 2-3 years, how many quarterbacks in the NFC are definitely better than Kirk Cousins? Maybe 2 or 3?
Yeah,
Two?
I
I don't
mean
know.
it's
I forget
not a
the
long
number.
list. It's
Yeah.
definitely not a long list. And here's the other part of it that I really like as well. Like the contract detail stuff, I actually did not know that part. That is a key detail to, and I'm glad you brought that up. But just from a football standpoint, one, this is the best offensive line Kirk Cousins has ever played in front of, and
Yep.
two, the running game that is getting paired with Kirk Cousins is definitely going to be the best of his career. Having Bijan, Tyler Algier in the backfield, that is extremely formidable. And I think, we've seen year over year over year where obviously Kirk had, great weapons, great wide receivers in Minnesota. But the one thing Minnesota never did do properly for Kirk was, get a great interior O line to where Kirk could step up in the pocket consistently and have that, comfortability in the pocket. I think in Atlanta, he won't be as under siege as often. Like he took a beating in Minnesota, even in the year where they were, the third seed and they won all those games, all those close games. He took a beating for a lot of that year. He had injured ribs and all types of different ailments. So if you can keep Kirk Cousins upright, you're going to get the best version of Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and that's important, especially considering he's coming off this injury. I think there is also a little bit of familiarity here that some people might not know initially on the surface. Cousins, when he was first getting his opportunity back in his days in Washington, Raheem Morris was on that staff. And so he has some familiarity with Raheem Morris, who is now the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. And to add on to that, I think he's going to recognize elements of the Zach Robinson offense. They brought in Zach Robinson, the passing game coordinator from the Los Angeles Rams, as their offensive coordinator. That's who they hired. And Zach Robinson initially learned under Kevin O'Connell, who was, of course, Kirk Cousins' coach in Minnesota the past couple years, when both those guys were on the Rams staff under Sean McVay back in 2020 and 2021. So there are the ties where you can kind of connect the dots and say, okay, there is some familiarity here. There are some ties that we can draw. And this really, to me, is a 2-year thing. Can you put us in contention in the NFC for the next 2 years? And if he's the Kirk Cousins that we've seen the past 2 years, coming off this injury with a better offensive line, a better run game, and an improving defense, absolutely. So
Yeah,
I don't know. I give it like there's still a level of uncertainty here. I don't know that I can go as far as to give it an A, but I mean, it's close. I don't know.
I
What would
think
you?
barring what they do in the rest of free agency and in the draft, it could be an
Yeah,
A.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
think possibly bringing in a Levante David is on the table, or any mixture of quality free agents on defense and maybe a receiver here or there. And I mean, this team is not that far away.
Not at all. Um. Okay. Where do we move next? It's up to you.
I think we move over to the running backs. I really liked what Green Bay was able to do today. Bringing in Josh Jacobs. Regardless of what you thought of, him holding out last year and all those types of things, he didn't start out the year great when he was getting back to playing, but he closed the year strong, and I think is still going to give you a high level of production, especially with the creativity of Matt LaFleur. And I really like what they're building in Green Bay, just as a whole. On top of all that, they bring in Xavier McKinney, the safety from the New York Giants, who was the best safety available in free agency by all accounts, only 24 years old. Um, but just on the running back front, just with Josh Jacobs and them ultimately cutting Aaron Jones, uh, what did you think of the move?
I really like it. Um. Look, I think they're hoping to provide, of course, their young quarterback Jordan Love with a good support of a really good, effective rushing attack. Jacobs provides that absolutely. He's recorded 1,000-yard campaigns in 3 of his last 5 seasons in the NFL. He was regarded as one of the top backs on the market, right there with Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Austin Eckler. Um, I think he'll balance out Green Bay's offense a little bit. Um, who wants to establish a run game and then capitalize on big plays down the field in the play action game. Um, of course, now we know how it affects the role of Aaron Jones, who's now a free agent, as Green Bay decided to release him shortly after making this move. Um, but I think at this point, I would take Josh Jacobs over Aaron Jones. And this fits kind of their timeline on offense. When you look at their offense, it's Jordan Love, who's 25. It's Josh Jacobs, who's 26. It's Romeo Dobbs, who's 23. It's Jaden Reed, who's 23. It's Christian Watson, who's 24. It's Dontavian Wicks, who's 22. Luke Musgrave, the tight end, he's 23. Tucker Kraft, he's 23. You look at some of their offensive linemen. I mean, the oldest guy on this offense is Elton Jenkins, 28 years old. And they still have plenty of cap space and draft picks to continue building this team. And Green Bay, they've done a really nice job since the departure of Aaron Rodgers, despite what some people initially thought. And that looks scary, honestly. Like if Jordan Love is the guy that we saw last year and he continues to ascend, this could be really scary. And I think the arms race in the NFC North now is really interesting because the Lions made moves too today. So those two teams I think will be neck and neck next year going into um, the season. And it's too early to make any predictions. We have to see the draft. The rest of free agency has to play out. But based on what's happened so far, that's what it's looking like, especially with the departure of Kirk Cousins from the Vikings. And we'll see what the Vikings decide to do at quarterback. They made some moves on defense today, but who knows? I mean, the Bears could be improved too. We don't know what's going to happen there yet. I think this
Yeah,
NFC North division becomes really, really intriguing.
definitely, definitely. I think you have multiple candidates for, obviously with the Bears if they make a big jump, and then the Vikings, we don't know what they'll do at quarterback, but they're a team that has been solid for a while now. The Lions and the Packers, I think, will be contenders in the NFC next year. Like I see no reason to believe that they won't be right there in the mix come January next year. I think they both have room to improve. They're both young. They're both up and coming. I think it's interesting to see, kind of the vision of Brian Gutekunst come into effect a lot more clearly since Aaron Rodgers has left. I just think there was something more to, some of the decisions that were being made when Aaron Rodgers was there. Because ever since he's left, it's just felt like they've been investing in their young guy so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can I add one more thing to this real fast?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It doesn't tie to Josh Jacobs, but I do think the Packers on day one came away one of the winners because they
for
also
sure.
added Xavier McKinney on defense, the safety um, who's going to replace Darnell Savage. Good player, but he departed. He agreed to a deal with the Jaguars. So they bring in Xavier McKinney, I believe, from the New York Giants,
Yep.
um, who agreed to a 4-year deal worth $68 million. I think he's an upgrade over Darnell Savage. Great range, good ball skills. He should help shore up the back end of that defense. I think they needed some more playmaking in the back end of their defense. They ranked in the
Yeah.
bottom third of the league in takeaways. That could certainly help a young offense, give them more opportunities with the ball. And I think, with switching defensive coordinators, that probably also plays a part in this as well as they moved on from Joe Barry and they brought in Jeff Halfley from Boston College, which is a move that we haven't talked about all that much, but I think it's a real solid move.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
um, yeah, I mean, I think the Packers, they're obviously going young. They have a vision. I agree with you on Brian Gutekunst. And the bottom line is if Jordan Love is that guy and you've got all these guys basically on rookie contracts for the next 3 or 4 years, with this kind of window opening up to compete in the NFC, it's not something I would have thought I would be saying, a year and a half ago, but here we are.
Yeah, yeah, or even just a few months ago when they were sitting at 2-5 or wherever it was. But
Exactly.
yeah, here we are. Okay. Next move I think we got to touch on is Saquon Barkley to the Eagles. When I saw this at work, I was just not in huge amount of shock because this was a move where TFG Marcus Whitman he on his podcast where he did one ideal free agent move for every team. His move for the Eagles was Saquon Barkley. I just thought it was a move that just made sense for both sides. It's a very running back friendly offense as we've seen, and man, it just feels like the Eagles are just the right amount of aggressive every offseason. Like they don't overexert themselves in positions of non-value usually, but in terms of the running back position, it's hard to do much better than Saquon Barkley. Even at 28 years old, he's the type of running back who, with his physical tools, with his physical ability, and just his skill as a pass catcher in all different facets of the game, he is a weapon that is going to instill fear into the defense. And having those guys on the field, you can't you can't value that enough. I mean, it's just huge.
Yeah, I mean, with what he's done, some of the health ups and downs he's been through, but the production speaks for itself with 3 1,000-yard seasons in his last 6 years behind a bad offensive line.
Yeah,
Bad offensive line, for the most part. And he came close last year, 962 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns on 247 carries. Just turned 27, according to The Athletic. Um, I think with the Eagles, with the better offensive line, he can, number one, maybe take some of the burden off Jalen Hurts in the run game, just because I think he's on another level. Look, I love DeAndre Swift. I think there are a lot of good running backs in this league, but Saquon is on another level in terms of the caliber of player I think he is.
yeah.
I mean, there was a reason he was drafted. Where did he go in the draft? Was it
Second overall, I
second
think.
overall? Yeah, I mean, that speaks for itself. He's going to add a welcome element to this offense that features a dual threat quarterback in Jalen Hurts and some dynamic weapons on the outside, although I think they still need to add to that. And this still doesn't fix some of the problems that they had in their secondary, but that's another story for another day. But this is a good start. I mean, yeah, if I could get Saquon Barkley at age 27 for a good price for 3 years for the player that he is, I would do it too, especially if I were a team like the Eagles. And I think the point that you brought up about the Eagles kind of just never going too far, but always seemingly doing good for themselves and their organization in the offseason is totally on point.
And people, like a lot of people are down on the Eagles right now, obviously with the way they closed last season. But I feel like people are forgetting just how much potential is just hidden within this roster. Just when you name guys like Jalen Carter, just him alone, you can point to and be like, he's a guy who's ready to take another leap forward after his going into his second year. Um, and then obviously there's this isn't a perfect roster, definitely not, but I definitely do think you can't ignore them when it comes to contenders in the NFC. They're still right up there.
Absolutely. In terms of other running back moves, we saw Tony Pollard. We saw him go to Tennessee. He'll pair with Tajay Spears. We saw DeAndre Swift go to the Bears on what I felt like was a little bit of an overpay, but certainly a good player
Yeah,
that the Bears got. Um, what were the other running back
Eckler to the
moves?
Commanders.
Eckler to the Commanders is interesting. Anything else you want to hit on? I'll say this. I was surprised that the running back market was this kind of robust with this many running backs flying off the board this soon. But I mean, good for them. I don't.
Yeah,
You
I
have a thought on
think
that?
I think the pendulum was due for it to swing back in this
Yeah.
direction. I think the running back position, it's still extremely important. It just is. You look at what the Chiefs had in Isaiah Pacheco this year. I mean they don't win a Super Bowl without what he was able to do. Like with the offensive struggles they had throughout the year, if they
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a solid running game through that, there was no offense there. It was there was nothing really. There was no passing game to speak of at times. So having a good running game when for those times when the passing game just isn't clicking, you just need it. There's just no way around it.
Absolutely. Um, I guess I just didn't expect this many deals this soon from
Yeah,
the
I,
running back
I agree with
position.
that.
But at the same time, have we seen a running back free agent class this good? Like, when's
I
the
don't
last
think
time
so.
we?
No.
I think that probably plays a part into it as well. Like Saquon Barkley, guys of his caliber, guys of Josh Jacobs' caliber, all pro caliber guys at their age, 26, 27 years old, still relatively within their physical primes, don't come onto the market that often. Oftentimes you see running backs that are franchise tagged or, just not worth that caliber of attention in free agency when they hit the open market because they've just been
Yeah,
run down into the ground on their rookie deals. But I mean, there's still Derrick Henry out there.
yeah.
There's still a couple guys still sitting out there, so it'll be interesting to see where this goes. What did you think of the DeAndre Swift move? And then, of course, since you're a Cowboys fan, what are the Titans getting in Tony Pollard? Like, what? How do you think that's going to
Well, I
work
think
itself?
a lot of Cowboys fans became like slowly more and more pessimistic about Tony Pollard over the course of last year, which is fair. But people forget he was coming off a really huge injury to his leg, and I think it usually takes a year, maybe more, to fully get back to full speed. So, I mean, he's a speed back that just he's elusive. He's good on like he can break tackles, and once he gets in the open field, he'll run away from guys. And there's not a lot of guys like that in the NFL. And especially for the Titans, they definitely need that speed threat. They don't really have a ton of guys like that with that level of juice. He's not. He's probably not what he was 2 years ago, even, but he's still plenty quick enough. And then the first question you asked me.
DeAndre Swift to the Bears.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I think it's a solid move. I think I'm probably with you on it being just maybe a slight overpay, but um, having him paired with Caleb Williams, which right now it is looking like it's going to be Caleb Williams. Um, I mean, I think it's solid.
Yeah, I
At
mean,
the very least, I think for 2 years he'll give you solid production, and then if you want to maybe find an out for that third year, you can. Usually, there's some like weird void year stuff within that type of thing. So I don't think it's the worst move in the world, but I definitely think there was better options.
yeah, I mean, look, he's coming off a career season with the Eagles where he was their future back. He rushed for over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns on 229 carries, and he did catch 40 balls for another 214 yards and a touchdown. So he is a fairly versatile back. They can do a lot of things with him. I was just surprised that they went out and made the move 3 years, 24 million, which isn't exorbitant. It's not going to kill you.
Yeah,
And it's only, I think it's 15 million in guarantees or something along those lines. But when you had Khalil Herbert, when you had Deontay Foreman, when you have Roshan Johnson, who you just drafted on cheaper deals,
yeah,
I mean, it's just kind of weird.
it is strange.
Um,
Yeah, it definitely is
but
strange.
I don't know. Like, he's a good player, so can't really knock it. They're trying to upgrade it. I think I would consider DeAndre Swift a better player than what they have currently on their roster. But at the same time, it's like, okay,
I mean, don't you
let's
want to
see.
see what Roshan is for you? Don't you want to? I mean,
Exactly. That's my
there's
point. That's my
yeah,
point. It's like, okay. Like, that's fine. Uh, the most important thing for the Bears, though, is going to be uh, number one, of course, the quarterback, what they do with Fields, and I'm assuming they'll get Caleb Williams in the draft, how that situation works itself out, and what else they do to supplement what's around Caleb Williams will kind of determine how successful this offseason has been for them. But what they finished last year, they were 6 or 7 wins. Like
Yeah,
they
I think
really
they
kind of
ended up
improved.
being. I think they were 6-9-1, or 6-10-1. I think they did end up with a tie in there. I think, but
They did improve from start of the season to end of the season, so they can kind of hope. The hope I think from Chicago fans, and I do have a couple of friends who are Chicago fans, is that they build on that momentum. So we'll
yeah,
see what
they got.
happens. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball. I think we've kind of exhausted what there is right now on offense. Um, the number one thing that happened today, in my opinion, was the Christian Wilkins deal with the Raiders. Um, uh, it's 4 years, 110 million, I believe.
Yeah,
Your thoughts on that? First of all, the Dolphins losing him, and then the Raiders giving him that contract.
yeah. It really sucks for the Dolphins. Jalen Phillips being out with an Achilles, and then Bradley Chubb, being kind of the lone guy left there, being healthy. All of those defensive line injuries stacking up on each other, and then having to pay both of those guys, and now not having the money for Bradley. It's just, or for Christian Wilkins, it really does sting a lot. But for the Raiders, I mean, it's a big splash move. Maybe not one that I was really expecting a whole ton, but I mean, look, I mean, if you're the Raiders, you just want to bring in talent at premium positions. And one thing that we talked about on our last mock draft was defensive tackle right now is probably as important as it has ever been. Like, just a defensive tackle that can both rush the passer and make an impact in run defense is, I mean, one of the only defensive players that can make an impact all three downs, pretty much every down on defense. So, I mean, Christian Wilkins is on a short list of guys that can do that. And I mean, he's still young. He's still producing at an extremely high level. So it's a good move. They whether they'll be ready to win during the over the course of the contract, it's going to be yet to be seen. They have a lot of work to do, but it's a good move.
Absolutely, it's a good move. I mean, he's one of the best interior defensive linemen in the league
Yeah,
based on his performance. Outside of Chris Jones, I mean, he recorded 9 sacks for the Dolphins last year. And in the NFL, you get paid number one for your production, your recent production, and then I do believe that there is kind of a projection element to some of these contracts and what you could be for us, what your value is for our team. And I think for the Raiders, it fills a very significant need for them. Um, these guys don't grow on trees everywhere. They're very hard to find, especially the caliber of a Christian Wilkins. And now your defensive line with the combination of Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins on the interior looks very scary to, or at least very, it is something offenses have to account for, both on you
for
have a guy
sure.
on the interior and like a star, possibly a tier one guy in Max Crosby on the edge. Like those
Yeah,
are
I think he is a tier one guy.
those are two premium positions in the NFL.
And then a
Now,
young guy developing in Tyree Wilson as well.
exactly. Now you just have to continue to acquire talent at premium positions, like you said. We can argue about the money all day. 4 years, 110 million, 85 million in guarantees. But I think initially for Antonio Pierce in his first full season on the job, and for Patrick Graham, who comes over as the defensive coordinator, I think this kind of shows the identity that they want to build for this team. And we'll see where it moves going forward. But certainly, this is a good start. Uh, you don't find Christian Wilkins running around everywhere nowadays. So
Yeah, definitely not.
if you have the opportunity to get them, go get them. Uh, where do we go next? What was the next defensive move that stood out to you today?
Well, I think it was the Vikings bringing in Jonathan Grenard for I think 87 million in total over 4 years. He exploded onto the scene his third year in the league. I think year before last year on a bad Texans team had over 10 sacks, and then this year came back, did it again, kind of as a number two guy alongside Will Anderson. And I think the question for him for a long time was, oh, he's not, this crazy, freaky athlete. Is he going to be able to be a number one edge rusher?
Mm-hmm.
And I think obviously he still has questions to answer in terms of that, but just the level of production that he's been able to have, I mean, it's you can't argue with it.
No.
And obviously them losing Daniil Hunter, um, I mean, for the guys in that building to, see Grenard as a viable replacement, I think says a lot about what Grenard has really put on tape over the last 2 years. I mean, it's been extremely impressive. Um, I think I I would kind of compare him, I guess, in this year's draft to like Leatu Latu, kind of not as freaky, but just so um, polished and just relentless as a pass rusher. I know it's not typical for you to compare an NFL player to someone in the draft, but he was just fresh in my mind as a guy that's of that mold, just a relentless guy.
Yeah, I'll be quick with my take. I think it's a really solid move. They are going to most likely lose Daniil Hunter to a free agency. They're bringing in Grenard, who 27 years old, 12 and a half sacks this past year, 48 pressures for the Texans last season. And I think, look, as long as he's healthy, um, because he did have that, he came into the league, um, you know, had a kind of injury shortened campaign in 2022 where he only had 1.5 sacks. So injuries kind of are a concern, but you can say that for almost anybody. But this year's production, I think they're hoping, in Brian Flores' defense, which is one of the more blitz happy defenses in football, if he can stay healthy, he could be a real force for them and kind of turn
Yeah,
into one of them dudes on the edge.
yeah. Him and DJ want him on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess my question automatically kind of becomes, we've done a couple mock drafts, and in those mock drafts, if I recall correctly, we've had conversations about the Vikings and them going after an edge potentially in round one, maybe like a Dallas Turner if he's available, a Jared Verse if he's available, one of those top dudes. I wonder if this changes anything on that front. Maybe not. I don't know. Haven't really thought about it, but it is an interesting conversation.
I think this may even push them in the direction of Byron Murphy.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
That would be a good move. I would like that. Okay. Like Jonathan Grenard, we hit on Xavier McKinney. Did you have any thoughts on that for the Packers? Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean it was a need for sure. Savage, as solid as he was at times, he was inconsistent guy. And would have flashes of really great play and also just kind of get lost in coverage at different points as well. And I think McKinney raises the floor of the quality coverage you're going to get on the back end, but also he's someone who he has a knack to find the football as well. Like on a bad Giants team the last couple of years, the fact that he was able to have as many turnovers, as many key plays as he has been able to make, going into a more winning situation, I think it'll be even more magnified. I think he's just at that level of player, and I think he's kind of been overlooked in this free agency cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Three more moves we need to hit on quickly before we get out of here. Number one, I want to get your thoughts on Bryce Huff going from the New York Jets to the Philadelphia Eagles. I believe it's 3 years, 51 million. Huff, he was undrafted out of Memphis back in 2020, had a breakout year for the Jets this past year, where he went for 10 sacks and 29 tackles as kind of a rotational pass rusher in their defense. And presumably, he's going to move into a more prominent role with the Eagles as Vic Fangio, probably in this Eagles organization, hopes he can continue to ascend on that trajectory. And if he does, this will be really good value. I mean, $18 million a year for a really solid pass rusher in today's NFL, I believe, is really nice value for the Eagles. Again, still doesn't help their secondary much, which is a joke I like to make, but he's an interesting case. It's not all that often you see undrafted players turn into really solid or potentially star NFL players this soon. But look, I mean, good for him. He's earned it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had my eye on Bryce Huff for a while. After I do watch that franchise guy a lot, and he had a third to fourth round grade on Bryce Huff, and when he ended up on the Jets and immediately was starting to make an impact, I thought, wow, like if he, him paired with at the time Carl Lawson, who they had just signed, it looked really promising, and obviously he developed into a really good player. But with the amount of defensive line talent the Jets had, he was only getting 400 snaps, 350 snaps a season. So for him to have as many sacks as he's had, with just playing, I think 40% of snaps of defensive snaps. I mean, it's not only extremely impressive, but it's also like he just gets it done, man. When he's on the field, he just knows, he just has a knack for getting to the quarterback, and he's just very naturally gifted as well. Like the amount of speed off the edge, the bend, that paired with the pressure you're going to get up the middle with Jalen Carter, also, I think it's a home run move, man. Like as much as I dislike the Eagles, I mean, I can't even knock either of these moves the Eagles have made. They're one of the big winners from today, no question about it.
Okay, I agree with that. And another move I wanted to ask you about, the Jaguars had an interesting day. They, with the uncertainty surrounding Calvin Ridley, went out and they added Gabe Davis from the Buffalo Bills for, I believe it's 3 years, $39 million officially, but he has incentives that could bump this up to as much as $50 million. As you know, Gabe Davis largely viewed as a solid number two option when he's been healthy for the Buffalo Bills. Um, he spent the first 4 seasons of his career kind of as that sidekick number two to Stephon Diggs, Batman, if you will. And, he's averaging 40 catches a year, 680 yards, and almost 7 touchdowns good size, 6'2", 225, knows how to use his size. He'll add to that receiving room, which right now consists of Christian Kirk and Zay Jones. Your thoughts on this move, Gabe Davis to the Jaguars?
Well, he's a deep threat that they've needed. He doesn't have like the crazy deep speed, but he has good tracking ability deep down the field and in the intermediate passing game as well. Um, the consistency part of it has always been a head scratcher to me,
Yeah.
but I mean, maybe in a new spot, maybe that'll click for him. We saw, Christian Kirk kind of have a similar thing in Arizona where he wasn't really all that productive, but still showed so many flashes of being extremely talented, kind of in the same way Gabe Davis has. So maybe there's something to that. I wouldn't bet on him, having this crazy breakout, but I think him being I guess a 2B receiver to, Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, I think there's a lot worse receiving course in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. A couple more moves. We still have 5-ish minutes here. The Rams, they went out today and they upgraded significantly on the interior of their offensive line. They're, of course, aiming to extend Matthew Stafford's career here a bit further. And they're investing heavily in the interior of their offensive line. Earlier, I think in the offseason, they extended Kevin Dotson, who they traded with Pittsburgh to get. As Pittsburgh kind of reshuffled their offensive line, he's been solid for them on one side of the line. Now they go up and they get Jonah Jackson, who turned into a Pro Bowl left guard and an instant starter for the Detroit Lions on a 3-year, $51 million deal that features $34 million in guarantees. And he's going to reunite with his original quarterback, Matthew Stafford. And they've really kind of done a good job so far of upgrading this offensive line. So your thoughts on the Rams adding a really nice offensive lineman in an area of big need?
Well, I think the Rams have not quietly, but they've been one of the best organizations in football for a while now. So I think they just have a really good sense of, you know, they identify a need and they have a way of just knowing like we would rather do this in the draft and do this in free agency. And obviously, offensive line, you want established guys. And I think number one, having depth and having established guys, especially on a team that wants to, go out and win. I think it's a huge step in the right direction for sure.
Okay, and then last thing, I think there's an interesting conversation. Not yelling fire in a crowded theater. By no means am I doing that. We're not taking this in a negative direction. But it came out, I believe it was last night or early this morning, that T. Higgins has requested to be traded from the Bengals. Of course, Tyler Boyd is a free agent. So there's two other receivers that are up for grabs, basically. Not, I mean, anything could happen with Tyler Boyd at this point. Maybe they're more incentivized to bring him back, given that T. Higgins is likely going to be elsewhere. But I do think there's an interesting conversation of just like, where is this going with the Bang? What is this offense going to look like? Because it's going to be certainly some new faces and new places here. They just got rid of Joe Mixon. Just your overall thoughts on Cincinnati and where they stand on the offensive side with some of their pieces that they're kind of reshuffling, I guess.
Well, I think there's definitely some concern there, but the good news is they already have him on the franchise tag, him being T. Higgins, obviously. So they can wait this out a good while. I think the franchise tag deadline is pretty late in the process.
Yeah,
I think like late July even.
yeah,
So we could see this, getting pushed back and back and back, possibly up until then. So we'll see what happens. But if I were a betting man, I would probably lean that they don't trade him and you know, maybe they end up drafting a receiver at some point in the draft.
yeah. I mean, it's a wide receivers heaven. This draft is so deep at that position. So
Yeah.
they,
Yeah, it's
I
incredible.
mean, you're not yelling, fire in a crowded theater by any stretch of the imagination. But I just interested to see uh, how this situation works itself out. As a, I'm going to be honest, as a Steelers fan, I'm kind of in the camp if it's, of course, for within reason on the money side of things of bringing in a guy like Tyler Boyd uh, for the Steelers offense, just a veteran for this receiving room. There have been rumors of potentially exploring a trade surrounding Deontay Johnson. We'll see where that goes. But aside from all of that, we'll end it with this. Each of us choose one player that's out there that you are most, I guess, excited or intrigued to see what happens, where they go or where they end up or what happens with them. Uh, it could be a free agent, someone on the trade block. Who comes to mind for you? That one player that really sticks out that hasn't been signed yet, but you're super intrigued as to what happens for their future.
Well, right off the bat, I think of Tyron Smith, left tackle, longtime left tackle for my Cowboys. It looks like he's not going to be coming back. And this past year, he showed that he has a lot of good football in the tank. He's 33 years old. He's had a lot of injuries in the past. But if you're, what's a team that needs a left tackle? If you're, say, the Jaguars, for example, and you kind of need tackle help, I mean, why not bring in a Tyron Smith? I mean, that's that's a guy who's going to be in the Hall of Fame. Um, I think him as well as what could happen with Cortland Sutton. I know nothing's really been reported yet, but that crossed my mind earlier today with Jerry Judy being sent out, and then Cortland Sutton obviously sending out that cryptic tweet about him not being happy. Cortland Sutton could be a really good trade target for a lot of different teams. So he's someone who's on my radar.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a little bit as well. The two names that come to mind specifically for me right at the bat. Number one, L'Jarius Sneed,
Yep.
who's on the franchise tag, but he's on the non-exclusive franchise tag, meaning his camp can still talk to other teams and try to work out a trade where potentially the Chiefs trade him and he gets extended on another team if the Chiefs, given that they just broke the bank for Chris Jones, maybe aren't looking to give him the money that he might deserve, but might not be right for what their situation is right now. I'm really interested to see where he goes. There are a
Yeah.
lot of teams right now in the NFL that could use a cornerback, just a solid player of his caliber, particularly my Pittsburgh Steelers, but there are a ton of other teams that could use his services.
Yeah.
And then
Detroit immediately came to mind for me for him.
yeah. They just traded for Carlton Davis earlier today, which was interesting to me. He's kind of been more of a up and down player. I don't know that the
Yeah.
consistency has been there. But given that I think they lost or maybe are going to lose CJ Gardner Johnson, they still need help in the secondary, no doubt. But the other player that sticks out to me is Eric Armstead, who was released by the 49ers. I believe it was yesterday. Um, Good player, really good player. Um, the 49ers just wanted to free up, I think, some flexibility there. But where does he end up? because he's another one of those guys on the interior of a defensive line that could really help some team. Those were the two names that immediately stick out to me. I also want to know where Patrick Queen ends up because the inside linebacker market is interesting.
Yeah.
Um, we'll see where that goes. I believe Kenneth Murray, while we've been on the podcast, signed with the Titans.
Hmm.
So they've made some interesting moves. They got Lloyd Cushenberry, the center from the Broncos. They of course brought in Tony Pollard, and now they bring in Kenneth Murray. Um, so we'll see where that goes, but still some big names out there. So we'll address the rest of it at a later time once more of this stuff plays out. But anything else on your mind that you need to get off
Well,
your chest before?
on the point of Eric Armstead, I personally love the idea of him reuniting with Ryans in Houston. That would be obviously a huge need for Houston, but that would just be a home run in all assets. I think D'Amico will be able to get the most out of him.
Yeah. Still currently out there on the inside linebacker market. Patrick Queen, Bobby Wagner, Levante David, Willie Gay Jr. from the Kansas City Chiefs, Jerome Baker, really solid player for the Dolphins, Devin White. Like it is a pretty robust inside linebacker market. We'll see how many teams are willing to kind of dish out the money at that position, but and I don't know what the market right now really looks like for all those guys, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it
Uh,
seems like linebacker is becoming one of those positions where teams really want to play hardball in terms of negotiation.
yeah, I could see definitely the Steelers potentially going after a guy like Jerome Baker from the Dolphins. I think that would be
Yeah,
a good
I
fit
could see that as well.
alongside a Landon Roberts. But that's all really for me. Free agency's nuts. The legal tampering period is absolutely chaos nowadays in the NFL, and it will continue on into tomorrow and probably the next week or so for this initial first and second wave. We'll continue talking draft. We'll continue talking free agency. We'll continue talking offseason, any major trades that happen. But in terms of what this week looks like, we're going to have Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports likely tomorrow night. We're going to get into our baseball preview possibly tomorrow night, but if not tomorrow night, sometime this week as the season's right around the corner. And yeah, we'll be covering the NBA as well. So that's about it for me.
All right, yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you as well. I mean, I think this was a really good episode. I think a little bit more off the cuff, just because I wasn't able to do as much prep as
I was
normal, obviously, but turned out really well. Had a lot of fun.
absolutely. So just like goodness, just like what happened in sports over the weekend.
Uh,
I don't know. Just like
Carl Anthony Towns' knee. Oh, that's kind of
the
messed up.
chances of Scotty Scheffler missing a putt inside of 15 feet over the weekend. We are going, gone. Peace.
Yeah, I like yours better. Peace out.